Professor Rose will be presenting a PowerPoint in anticipation of the upcoming exhibit at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology entitled The Golden Age of King Midas, to which exhibit Ms. Curie and I are planning to take students this spring. Please join me now in giving Dr. Rose a warm.
Thanks to all of you for coming. I've had the good fortune of excavating in Turkey for the last 28 years. For 25 years at the site of Troy, as you see here in what is now northwestern Turkey. And then for the last 8 years at Gordion in the center of Turkey, not far from the modern Turkish capital of Ankara. And that's what I want to speak to you about today, highlighting what our most important discoveries at Troy have been over the last 25 years, because I know some of you are studying Latin. And then also highlighting what the Penn Museum's excavations at Gordion have told us about the Phrygian kingdom, which controlled much of what is now the Republic of Turkey during the first millennium BC, because, as Donald said, we will have a major exhibit on Gordion, the capital of the Phrygian kingdom, at the Penn Museum, opening in February and running for 10 months. But we start with Troy, which is my first real excavation upon becoming a professor. Troy's located in the northwestern corner of Turkey, in a part of Turkey that we call the Troad, jutting out into the Aegean Sea. And when we think of Troy, you need to think of the strategic geographical location of the site. You know it as a place where a war occurred because there was a woman seized from Greece, from the palace of Sparta, and taken across the Aegean Sea to Troy. And I can't say that that's impossible any longer. But what I can say is that even more important is the strategic geographical location of the site, right at the mouth of a body of water called the Dardanelles or the Hellespont. So you've got the Aegean Sea here separating Greece from Asia Minor or Turkey. Troy at the mouth of the Dardanelles. In order to access the Black Sea, you would have to sail past Troy, into the Dardanelles, into the Sea of Marmara, up the Bosphorus, past Istanbul or Constantinople, and then into the Black Sea. So whoever controlled Troy controlled the entrance to the Black Sea. That's why there have been so many wars at this site. We speak of one Trojan War, but in fact there were many, starting in the 3rd millennium BC and continuing all the way up to World War I. You see an aerial view here of the Mound of Troy, which is where I do most of my excavations, with a large cut in the center of the mound, made by the first archaeologist who worked here, Heinrich Schliemann. And the mound itself is one of the most complex areas where you could excavate, because it's not just one city, it's 9 cities, one built on top of the other. The Greeks dug a deep ditch, making it great and wide, and fixed the sharp stakes inside it. That's the kind of defensive ditch that we've now located at Troy, which means that there were 2 lines of defense for the city in the late Bronze Age. The fortification walls of the main citadel, and then this defensive ditch at the southern end of the lower city. But even defenses this sophisticated won't protect you forever, and we did find evidence for a major, what I often call an attack, but which I should really call armed conflict. This was on the southwest side of the mound, in this area, and I found piles of sling stones, blackened arrowheads, several skeletons, and blackened earth that was about 5 feet high. Clearly, this was some kind of armed conflict. And until recently, I would have said that these were foreigners attacking the city. And in a minute, I'll tell you why I'm not any longer certain of that. But I am certain there was armed conflict. We would be able to understand the conflict better if we had more writing from Troy. Only one piece of writing dating to the Bronze Age period has been found at Troy. We found it in 1995. You see it here. A bronze seal. This is very small. It has a diameter of only 4 centimeters, so that's less than an inch. Very, very small, but it does have writing on it. It's a pictographic script called Luwian, L-U-W-I-A-N, which was one of the main scripts of the Hittite Empire, which you see here. The Hittites controlled most of what is now Turkey during the 2nd millennium BC. Until 1200 BC, they had control of this area. Everything in blue is what they controlled. And they were at war at different times with the Mycenaean Greeks, whom you see here in purple. And you notice that there are purple lines on the western coast of Turkey. So this is a zone of conflict between Mycenaean Greeks and the Hittites, the first of the great east-west conflicts in history in the 15th, 14th, and 13th centuries BC. And then you see in another line of conflict here, the Hittites against the Egyptians, whom you see in this greenish yellow. So there was an enormous amount of warfare in this area, 15th, 14th, 13th centuries BC. And we've got some of the stories, some of the accounts of that warfare described on the clay tablets that have been found in the Hittite capital of Hattusha, near the modern Turkish capital of Ankara. One of the tablets referring to Eteocles, or in Hittite, Tawagalawa, which calls Wilusa an area over which the Mycenaean Greeks and the Hittites had difficulties, maybe had a war, maybe had a battle. The tablet is damaged right where it describes the problems experienced by the Hittites and the Greeks at the site of Troy. But clearly there was conflict there throughout the 13th century, and some of that was civil war. One of the tablets refers to the king of Troy, a man named Walmu, who's been thrown out of Troy by his fellow citizens. So a kind of Arab Spring that existed at Troy in the late 13th century BC, civil war at Troy. So when I look at these destruction levels now, I'm no longer certain whether they're caused by attackers coming in from somewhere far away to destroy the city of Troy, or whether it's the result of civil war, or whether it's a combination of the two. This is an effect that the recent developments in North Africa and the Middle East have had on us as archaeologists. As we watch the civil wars in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, if you think of the destruction levels in those areas, what are they going to look like? They're going to look like the destruction levels that we find at Troy. Does that mean that they're the product, the proof of foreign attacks? Some of them, but many of them are just the products of civil war. So as a result of what we see happening with the so-called Arab Spring, we're reassessing a lot of our destruction levels for antiquity and second-guessing whether or not we've got civil war or foreign attackers or a combination of the two. Now, after the Trojan War, Troy's prosperity decreases dramatically, and there's a different area that rises in strength and prominence, and that is Gordion, in the center of Turkey, excavated by the Penn Museum since 1950. In the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries, the Phrygian kingdom will control most of what we now think of as Turkey. And so you see the capital of Gordion here. What you see in mustard color here is Phrygia. And then here you see us engaged in some conservation work at the site. Here's an aerial view of the mound, which is 4 times the size of the mound of Troy, much stronger, with over 100 royal burial mounds surrounding the area. This one is 17 stories high. And this is the focus of a new exhibit that we're putting on at the Penn Museum, opening in the middle of February. We'll focus on the tomb of Midas's father, who is buried in that mound that I just showed you. Midas is the most famous of the kings of Gordion. You know of him as Midas of the Golden Touch, Midas the man who could turn anything he found into gold. We think of him as a legendary character, but he was an actual historical king who ruled at Gordion in the late 8th century BC. But our focus will be this tomb, the tomb of Midas's father, MM for Midas Mound, the tallest burial mound in Turkey for a period of 200 years, 17 stories tall. Within this mound, is a small burial chamber, which is the oldest standing wooden building in the world, 740 BC. You see it on the exterior and on the interior, and because it was buried under 170 feet of earth, robbers were never able to get to it. So everything that was put there at the funeral in 740 BC, we've excavated, and it will be part of this exhibit, including all of the bronze vessels, belts, safety pins, everything else that we found in the tomb, including the giant cauldrons that served the monumental funeral meal in 740 BC. We'll also have the world's earliest stone mosaic and we'll be able to present it to you, along with the story of our work bringing science into archaeology. We use remote sensing everywhere we go, the magnetometer. We also can date buildings based on how many rings there are in the timbers that form part of the buildings, a science called dendrochronology. All of this started in the Penn Museum, and much of it started at Gordion. So we look forward to being able to show this to you starting in mid-February, and I look forward to welcoming all of you there. Thanks very much.